My name is Kale Duras, and I am the only human being on Voreth 4. Not the first human to apply to the Coalition Combat Academy. Not the first to pass the entrance exams. Just the first one to actually show up, collect my bunk assignment, and stand in a hallway full of aliens who were all quietly doing the math on how long I would last. The answer, based on the expressions around me that first morning, seemed to be somewhere between 2 weeks and not very long at all. Voreth 4 is a heavy world, the kind of heavy that you feel in your teeth when you step off the shuttle. The gravity here is 14.2 meters per second squared, which means it pulls on everything with about 45% more force than Earth does. The sky is a deep greenish gray, the air smells like copper, and something faintly sweet that I never quite identified. And the buildings are all low and wide, because even the architecture here has learned not to argue with the ground. The training hall is the most impressive structure on the entire base. It is made of durathite composite, the same material the Coalition uses for starship hulls. The walls are half a meter thick. The floor is rated to absorb the kind of impacts that large, heavily built species produce when they train at full intensity. It has never needed to be repaired in the 40 years that Senior Instructor Vrax has been running this program. I noticed that detail in the orientation files. I filed it away without knowing why. Vrax himself was exactly what I expected from a Morathi, with 4 decades of experience and 4 arms to go with it. He was broad in a way that seemed architectural, like someone had designed him to take up space as a professional commitment. His skin was a dark, layered gray, and his 4 arms moved with the casual precision of someone who had long since stopped thinking about how to use them. He spoke clearly, expected perfection, and had a voice that arrived before he did. On the first day, he pulled up a display of Earth's atmospheric and gravitational data, projected it onto the briefing wall, and read from it in front of all 40 recruits. 9.8 meters per second squared, he said. This is the gravitational field in which Recruit Duras developed. For context, that is 69% of local standard. The human body, as catalogued in the Coalition Xenobiology database, is not rated for sustained exposure above 1.3 local equivalent. Acute physiological stress is expected above that threshold. Loss of consciousness is probable above 1.5. Structural damage to the body above 1.8. He closed the display. We will be making accommodations for Recruit Duras throughout the program. Please do not calibrate your own performance against the humans' adjusted outputs. They are not comparable. He said it the way you might say the weather is going to be difficult today. Not with cruelty, just with the complete confidence of someone who has read the data and trusts it entirely. I sat in the back of the room and said nothing. There was nothing to say. He wasn't wrong about the numbers. What the numbers didn't cover was what I had been doing for the past 4 months before arriving on Voreth 4. The other recruits were interesting to learn. Veth was a Korali, 6-limbed, and built like a piece of heavy machinery that had decided to become a person. He was not unkind, just enormously confident in the way that species with dense bones and superior grip strength tend to be. Ase was a Thyran, tall and faintly luminescent, with the kind of effortless physical grace that made everything she did look like it had been choreographed in advance. There were others from species I spent my first 3 weeks just learning to identify correctly. They were all stronger than me, faster in raw terms, better suited to the gravity. The gap between us on paper was not small. The first assessment confirmed it in precise numerical detail. I scored last in load bearing, last in peak force output. I scored 3rd in the endurance course, which surprised everyone, including me, and which Vrax recorded without comment. The endurance course had angles and lines in it that the other recruits simply didn't bother finding because their bodies didn't need efficiency the way mine did. I ran the shortest effective path through every section. Nobody had told me not to. Nobody had thought to. Vrax noted it. He didn't say anything, but I had started to learn that Vrax noting something silently was its own category of response. The weeks built on each other. I trained during the scheduled hours at the gravity accommodation Vrax had assigned me, which was 75% of local standard. Then I trained during the off hours, alone in one of the secondary conditioning rooms, at full local gravity with no accommodation at all. The first week of that was genuinely unpleasant. My body had opinions about what I was asking of it, and it expressed those opinions loudly and at length. I was tired, in a way that went deeper than muscle soreness, a kind of heavy, saturated exhaustion that seemed to live in my skeleton. I kept going anyway, because the only way out of a thing like that is through it. And because somewhere in the back of my mind, I had decided that I was not going to be a footnote in Vrax's 40-year record of accommodations made. By the third week, my body had stopped arguing and started adapting. That is the particular thing about human biology that the xenobiology database records accurately, but somehow fails to convey the real meaning of. The data says we adapt. What the data doesn't say is that we adapt constantly, relentlessly, and with a kind of biological stubbornness that treats every new pressure as a challenge to be absorbed and incorporated, rather than a limit to be respected. We spent 1 million years on a planet that compressed us. We got heavier, we got denser. We got back up every time the ground reminded us it was there. Then we built rockets and left, which was either the most logical next step or the most human thing that has ever happened, depending on how you look at it. By week 6 of my off-hours training, I had stopped throwing up after sessions. By week 8, I was completing full runs without stopping. By week 10, I was doing it twice. I told no one, not because I was being secretive in any dramatic sense, just because it seemed like the kind of thing that should speak for itself when the time came. The time came in week 11. The gravity calibration module was the final major assessment before field assignments were issued. The concept was simple. Each recruit walks the length of the training hall, while Vrax increases the gravitational field incrementally, measuring how high each recruit can go before their performance degrades significantly. It was designed to assess deep mission readiness, since field deployments often involved variable gravity environments, where knowing your limits mattered more than ignoring them. The floor of the hall gleamed under the overhead lights. Durathite composite, hull grade, 40 years without a mark on it. Vrax announced the assessment order. My name was at the bottom of the list with a note beside it. Accommodation protocol, 75% field standard. He read it aloud when he reached my name, because he was thorough, and because he had no reason to expect anything different from what the database predicted. Ase asked the question before the test began. She did it without looking at me, which told me everything about the nature of the question. Instructor Vrax, she said, what is the biological ceiling for a human, in practical terms? Vrax pulled up the database without hesitation. He read the thresholds I already knew by heart. 1.3 for acute stress, 1.5 for likely loss of consciousness, 1.8 for physical damage. He closed it. This is why the accommodation exists. Ase said, so a human cannot effectively operate in a standard combat gravity environment. Vrax said, not at standard parameters. The room absorbed this. Not with laughter, just with the quiet settling of something that seemed confirmed. I was standing at the back, which was where I had been standing for 11 weeks. I looked at the floor. I looked at the length of the hall. I made a decision. The recruits went in order. Veth walked through the increasing field with the steady, inevitable momentum of someone who treats gravity as a mild inconvenience. He made it to 1.5 before his gait shifted noticeably. He finished with a strong score. The room approved. Ase was elegant even under load. She made it to 1.6, her luminescence slightly dimmer under the pressure, but her form holding beautifully. The room approved again. Others went. Numbers were recorded. The floor stayed perfect. Then Vrax called my name and reached for the accommodation setting. Run it at full standard, I said. The room became very still. Vrax looked at me with the particular kind of attention that means a piece of information has arrived that doesn't match the existing model. The xenobiology profile, he began. Describes baseline, I said. I've been training at full local gravity for 6 weeks. He looked at me. I looked back. I wasn't performing anything. I was just tired of being a number that came with a footnote. He ran it at full standard. The field hit like being slowly filled with wet concrete. That is the closest description I have, and it still doesn't quite get there. It's not sharp pain, it's compression. Full body and patient. The physical sensation of the universe reminding you that it has rules, and you are not exempt from them. My spine loaded, my knees received the news, my lungs recalculated the cost of doing their job. I walked. 1 meter, 3, 5. The floor was smooth under my boots. The overhead lights were steady. Somewhere behind me, 40 recruits and one Marathi instructor were watching in silence, which I chose not to think about because I had enough to manage already. At 1.2, the edges of my vision went soft. I had been here before, in the conditioning room at 2 in the morning, and I knew what came after it if you kept going. The body registers the signal, considers the request, and then makes a decision about who is actually in charge. I had been having that argument with my own biology for 6 weeks. I had a reasonable winning streak. I kept walking. 1.4. The Karali threshold. My jaw was clenched. I was making no sound, which was a deliberate choice I had made before the test began, because I knew that sound would carry meaning, and I wanted the only thing that carried meaning today to be the result. 1.5. The thyron threshold. 1.52. I took a step. My proprioception was running about half a second behind my intention by that point, which meant the step landed with slightly more force than I had planned, transferring through my boot in a way that was not quite perfectly distributed, and the force went into the floor with a concentration that the Durathite composite, rated for Starship hull stress, had apparently not been specifically designed to handle from that angle at that weight with that particular vector. The crack was clean, thin, about 30 centimeters across, radiating outward from the point of impact like a quiet statement of fact. The room was completely silent. I finished the walk. I reached the far wall and put my hand on it, which I did because my legs had decided that heroism has natural limits, and they had reached theirs. I stood there for a moment. Then I turned around. 40 faces, 40 different species, 40 different sets of eyes and sensory organs and biological histories, all pointed at me with expressions I could not fully read but understood well enough. Vrax crossed the hall. He was not rushing, but he was not slow either. He crouched beside the crack and examined it, with all 4 arms folded behind him, the posture of a man who is genuinely studying something. He stayed there for a long moment, then he stood. "You trained off schedule," he said. "Yes, at full local field. 6 weeks. He was quiet. The kind of quiet that is not empty but full of something being processed and reorganized. "The xenobiology profile," he said again, not as an argument this time. More like a man checking a reference he's beginning to distrust. "Describes baseline," I said again. "We don't stay baseline." He looked at me. He looked at the crack. He looked back at me. And then he did something that, in 11 weeks, I had not seen him do once. He pulled up my file on the open display, visible to everyone in the room, and he removed the accommodation flag, just deleted it, cleanly, without ceremony. "No further adjustments," he said. "Duras trains at standard from this point forward." It wasn't an apology. Vrax was not built for apologies, and I didn't need one. It was something more honest than that. It was a correction. A man who trusted data updating his model because the data had changed. I nodded. My legs were filing formal complaints, but I nodded. That night, I sat in the barracks and thought about Earth. About 9.8 meters per second squared, which is not an impressive number by coalition standards. It sits well below the middle of the range. Dozens of worlds have more. Dozens of species evolved heavier. But 9.8, over a long enough time, builds something specific. It builds a body that treats pressure as information rather than instruction. It builds a biology that reads a limit as a suggestion and then spends the next few weeks quietly deciding whether to accept it. It builds a species that looked at the sky one day and thought, not with despair, but with the particular human brand of unreasonable confidence, that it seemed like the kind of thing worth getting past. The crack in the Durathite floor would be repaired by morning. You would never be able to see it. But it had happened, and in a coalition that measures species by their recorded ceilings, the ceiling that got recorded today was different from the one that had been in the file yesterday. Vrax didn't mock Earth's gravity again after that. He just stopped making accommodations for it. Out here, among species who have been watching the stars longer than we have had writing, among soldiers who were born into heavier worlds and stronger bodies, that quiet removal of a footnote from a file was the loudest thing I had heard since I landed. It turned out to be enough.